They could re-sign back Goran Dragic. They could re-sign back Andre Iguodala. They could play with the current pieces. If it doesn't work, it's like it never happened. But the difference in this trade, unlike almost any of the other midseason trades, is this. You really didn't give up anything.
Yeah.
Kelly Olynyk was going to leave as a free agent anyway, most likely based on their cap position. Avery Bradley was never here. He played 10, 11 games, and that was it. And you're going to pick swap next year, probably lose about 10 spots in the draft.
They don't care.
Swapping out for the Nets pick. The Heat have never cared if it's 18 or 28. They'll get by that. They'll out-scout you anyway. They'll take care of that.
They'll target a player anyway who probably goes higher than he was supposed to go.
And they will always tell you they had him as number 10 on their board.
Of course they did.
That's what teams do. So to me, it's kind of interesting. It's more of a sort of show me state kind of debut. Victor Oladipo, show us who you are. And I think it'll speak to his character because I think even last week when you and I were talking about Vic, we didn't know if he was really Heat culture. We didn't know if he was all in. He's waffled. He's been an intense player, and he's been a guy you really wonder if the game means everything to him. So these 24 games, I think, will really be telling. And again, this is not who Jimmy wanted. Jimmy wanted Kyle Lowry.
Right.
There were others. So I think he also has to prove himself to his teammates.
I think that's the biggest thing. I think he has to prove himself to Jimmy Butler. To me, that's above and beyond.
We
the
all
rest
do.
of it.
Everything on this team is based on proving yourself to Jimmy Butler.
That is exactly right. And I think that is what it is because you're right. It was not Jimmy's first choice. We all know Kyle was his first choice. And look, the Kyle prospect is still out there. I mean, look, Toronto looks to be in more of a tanking position than anything else now. And Kyle still made it known that this is an option for him in the offseason. So
absolutely. And if the Heat let go of Victor Oladipo, get a little bit creative on the restricted free agency of Kendrick Nunn and Duncan Robinson, they should have more than enough for a 35-year-old Kyle Lowry on a shorter-term deal. Absolutely.
Exactly. And so to me, when you talk about it being a trial, the other thing that's a little bit different about this is that you mentioned Dragic, which was kind of the last. I mean, last year was weird because they went on the road right after they picked up Iguodala and Crowder, remember, and they struggled on the road.
Right. Yeah.
And they had some other guys who were out, and it didn't really work very well. But you mentioned the Dragic one. Of course, the problem with the Dragic one was it was such a downer because then you got the Bosh news
Chris Bosh,
on the same day, so we never got to see it. So
Yeah.
in this particular case, kind of felt like holding Oladipo out was like they want to see it. You know what I mean? Like they don't want to take any chances.
They want to see the real Vic, not the rush Vic,
Exactly.
not the get up here playbook. It worked out fortuitously in an odd way that Caron Butler was also in pandemic protocols, so he's been at the arena to work with Victor also to at least get him up to speed. And you can tell how this is different, Ethan, because on a game day, without a shoot-around, on the second night of a back-to-back, they're still having a Victor Oladipo introductory press conference on Zoom at 11:30 because they realize this is not something you can put off till after the game and then say, well, you'll talk to Vic after. They realize this is a special moment for the Heat. This is a big move by the Heat bringing in this kind of name. This is a game changer. This is the difference between being a number 8 seed and maybe contending with Charlotte for the number 4 seed.
The other part of this is the Heat have made a decision what kind of team they are this year, which is fascinating to me. And we talked about this on 5 on the Floor last night. I cannot remember a Heat team that had such similar personnel to the previous season. Because, look, the guys logging 75% of the minutes or in the rotation are the same guys. I mean, yes, there's been some changes, of course, but it's still Butler and Bam and Hero and Robinson and Iguodala and Dragic. There's still a core 6. And yet this team has flipped on a dime. And now Eric is sort of all in on it from a team.
Always would have been.
And always, this is his thing. But they were a plus offensive team last year, and they were an average defensive team, and at least until the bubble and particularly the playoffs where it really mattered.
Right.
And this year they are a below average offensive team at this stage. I don't think there's any other way to look at it.
No, if you watch these first halves, it's like 36 points first half in New York, 43.
I mean, it's like 90s ball, okay?
Yeah.
Well, which should be played at a faster pace with no hand checking. And they are a below-average offensive team, and they have become pretty close to an elite defensive team, which I didn't feel was possible. And they've basically decided in a conference, and I think this was a conscious decision, that we're not going to outscore Brooklyn, right? Milwaukee has two-way players in a lot of positions, right? They've got, 3 guys who are really good defenders, okay? But they're also, all 3 of them added something offensively. They've essentially decided we're going all in on the defensive end. We've never really seen a quote-unquote, if you want to call this a big three like this, where all 3 guys it kind of starts on the defensive end with them, right? I mean,
Yeah, and this is it's funny because I've been comparing it to Golden State's death lineup when they had Durant and they had Iguodala and Draymond Green, Clay and Steph, and it was the ultimate death lineup of offense. You and I were talking before the show today. The Heat can put together an ultimate death lineup of defense of Adebayo, Iguodala, Ariza, Jimmy Butler, and Victor Oladipo of a different way of closing, of saying, okay, it's a tie game now. There's 3 minutes left. You're going to score 4 points, the opposing team, the rest of the way. We'll get 6, and that's how we're going to win. So it's a different approach. It might not be the most beautiful game, but as you know, early in the Riley era, it wasn't the most beautiful
hard to
game.
watch.
But winning is fun.
Right. And the other thing about it is, you mentioned it, if they're going to play those 5 guys in those situations, there are 3 shooters, including one guy who's closed often during his Heat career, Goran Dragic, one guy, Tyler Hero, who otherwise plays every minute of the fourth.
Again, 12 minutes last night.
And Duncan Robinson. These 3 guys are essentially going to be situational for offense in a lot of, right? I mean, because Eric is going to lean towards the defensive lineup to close, right? I mean, I would figure at most there's going to be room for 1, right?
Well, I think what's going to happen, Ethan, is when you play the lineup I just gave, if it's a night when either Ariza or Iguodala are hitting threes, when Jimmy's being aggressive, and when you get Bam eyes on the rim, you're fine offensively. That doesn't happen all the time.
Right.
Bam eyes on the rim is just a great thing. We saw it at the end of the game in Charlotte. We saw it in New York. We saw it last night. And you just wish it would happen all the time because it does so much for this team.
Right.
You get him at the end, he gives you offense. If Iguodala or Ariza hit threes, they'll give you the outside shooting that you need. I still think Ariza's coming around. The shots are there. He's creating his open looks. He's so smart. He's getting to the right spots already. And we know that playoff Andre Iguodala is a different player. He just turns it on then. So I think that group still can give you shooting and give you offense.
And having Ariza and Iguodala, I mean, we've seen the Heat have so many of these guys over the years, these 3-and-D type players that you could trust late. From a Bruce Bowen to a Dan Marley to, others that Shane Battier, etc. And I've been impressed with Ariza so far. Again, I know that the shot has not been there, but I mean, there doesn't seem to be a ton of rust on the defensive end, though. Like he came back and whatever he's doing at Remy, it worked because he came back in shape.
It's the winning plays that Spoelstra makes cliche a little bit too much, but you see it. He's around the ball.
Right.
The cliche knows for the ball. He's one of those guys. And Ethan, you can tell when a guy really wants to be here. And you can also tell when a guy really would like to be here next season as well.
Right.
So he's sort of pushing through for that. This won't be Jay Crowder seeking a big deal. I think Trevor realizes he's beyond that. If he can get that nice 2.5 veteran minimum, stay in Miami where he's born, where he's lived, where he trains in the offseason, I think he's taking the long view on this as well.
And that essentially makes up for the loss of Bradley, because the thought with Bradley was you have him for the 1 year and you can have him cheap next year too.
Right.
But you don't have Avery now, and you never really got to see it. And Ariza, in a sense, I'm not going to say he's a better defender than Avery, different kind of defender, but he's a longer defender than Avery, right? So, I mean, in terms of just height, okay? So Avery can guard up, but Ariza...
But more switchability here now with his length. And the other thing I was thinking of last night is, not so sure anymore this is Andre Iguodala's last season.
Yeah.
Because if the Heat do re-sign Victor Oladipo and then stay above the cap and bring back Goran and do it that way, they could pay him the 15 or at least have that 15 on the books. And I don't like to compare him here as the Myers-like trade unit at next year's trade deadline if they need it also. So I think it gets interesting from that standpoint.
Yeah, he's fit well, and I'm sure there'll be a conversation that he has with Eric about that because it seems like Eric's leaning on him so much. All right, we haven't talked about the big situation here, so we're going to do that after the break and also get into the rest of the Eastern Conference. And the Nets, I mean, when they ever get guys healthy, how vulnerable are they? Weeknights, 6 to 7 p.m., catch Game Night with Michael Christian. Listen to the show that provides a smorgasbord gamers love and sports fans' desire, from breaking sports news to the latest in the gaming culture. Catch Game Night with Michael Christian, 6 to 7 p.m., exclusively on OnSideRadio.com.
Onside Radio, the only choice for the South Florida sports fan.
Let's raise a cup to the first among us who put themselves last. To the risk takers, the mask makers, the heroes on the front line and online. To the ones keeping shelves full and keeping us hopeful. To those who don't stop and those making all the stops. To the ones who pick up, suit up, and never let us down. From all of us at Dunkin' to all the heroes keeping everyone running, we thank you.
You can't buy a best friend. You can love them, walk them, pet them, and care for them, whether they want you to or not. You can take a picture, or 50. You can fly to the moon, travel the world, or just stay in bed. You can't buy a best friend like that, but you can adopt one. There are millions of pets waiting for a best friend just like you. Help us save them all at bestfriends.org.
Onside Radio enters Kai's Corner with Kai Chen Chisholm every day from 10 a.m. to noon. Join Kai as he discusses the biggest stories in South Florida sports. Tune in every day, 10 a.m. to noon for Kai's Corner on the home for South Florida sports talk, OnsideRadio.com.
Hey, it's Big O. You know, air quality in your home or business is so important now, folks. That's why you've got to call M&S Air Conditioning. Let them install a high-efficiency polarized air filter in your AC unit that attracts, captures, and destroys biological contaminants to improve your air quality. M&S is always on call from 7:30 a.m. till 9 o'clock p.m. and, of course, emergency Sundays. Call for more info on high-efficiency air filters and their preventative maintenance plans. Visit M&S Air Conditioning at ac-florida.com.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the lingo.
GOAT, G-O-A-T, acronym, stands for Greatest of All Time. As in, spaghetti sandwiches for dinner? They're my fave. Dad, you're the GOAT.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Time for the hardcore basketball talk you crave. OnsideRadio.com presents Inside the Paint with Ethan Skolnick and Ira Winderman. To reach out to the guys, dial 888-441-4623. It's a flagrant foul if you're driving. Be safe, basketball fans. 844-416-8123. That's 844-416-8123. There's more to this game than just the score. So let's go inside the paint with two of the best in the business, Ethan Skolnick and Ira Winderman.
All right, welcome back to OnsideRadio.com for Inside the Paint, our weekly Heat chat between myself, Ethan Skolnick, and Ira. You can follow him at Ira Heatbeat. All right, let's get to what hasn't happened. We talked a lot about Oladipo, Ariza, Bjelica, maybe we'll get into a little bit later. But they still haven't added a big. They basically substituted out, Olynyk for Bjelica, but they were counting on getting somebody else. And obviously Aldridge, during the midst of the six-game winning streak, chose Brooklyn. Drummond went to L.A. There's not a hell of a lot else. Blake Griffin, of course, went to Brooklyn as well.
And DeMarcus Cousins now on 10 days soon with the Clippers.
Which tells you everything that you need to know
about the cautious approach with someone who everyone is. Why don't he get him when he's been out there since February 23rd?
And one of the concerns I heard about with Cousins was that if he doesn't play well, okay, it's no loss, but he doesn't add anything. If he does play well, then you have a problem also. Because if he did play well and then gets schemed off the floor in the postseason, how happy is DeMarcus Cousins going to be?
And that's the whole thing, is you have to have the guy in the locker room. In these COVID times, you're around guys in a different way. It's a different situation. The camaraderie might not be there to build the bond that you need. But they've got to do something, Ethan, because Precious was so inefficient in the first half last night that he didn't play in the second half. It's the same problem if you get to watch closely. He cannot handle a pocket pass.
Yeah.
He's mostly playing with Jimmy because, as you know, they stagger either Bam's off the floor or Jimmy's off the floor. Jimmy is so good with those passes that you could just see the look last night. It was lucky. It deflected off of Precious's hands and I believe went to the corner to Andre Iguodala, so they didn't lose possession on that. But it didn't work. Second half, Eric Spoelstra trying to figure out what to do. You can't run Bam Adebayo into the ground.
Right.
So he puts Nemanja out there, who's so different than Kelly, because he never goes near the rim.
Right.
Kelly at least had the dipsy doodle and got to the rim, and maybe then we get a tip in and an offensive rebound, and was rebounding very well for stretches also. So then he has to rush Bam back in there. You can't run the guy into the ground for the final 24 games of the regular season when you're going to need him big time anyway. You look at the names of who's out there on the big man list, and there's not a lot. I mean, there's Damian Jones, the Lakers had on a 10-day.
Dwayne Dedmon
He's
recovering.
young, Dwayne Dedmon. The name I like the best, I don't know where he is right now, or if he's even in the country, is Jan Mahinmi. He's
Yeah.
35. But for the Heat, that's your demographic anyway, because they all go to the early bird dinner anyway.
Right.
So you can deal with that. At least he can rebound. He can be tall. He can hit some shots. He has the experience. He's been in enough systems in Indiana and Washington maybe to fit in. By rule, you cannot stay at 13 for more than 2 weeks. So a week from today, the Heat must add another player. It could be on a 10-day contract,
Right.
and they could sort of sort through and look at other options. Another guy I thought of was Willie Reed,
Yes.
who was playing for the Heat. He's in Macedonia now. I checked. There are no nonstop flights from Macedonia to Miami, so that'll be an issue, let alone testing. And that's the other thing.
Right.
If you're out of the league,
Yeah.
the COVID testing is such
Yeah.
that if you sign a guy in a 10-day, you might not get him for the first week of that contract until he goes through all the protocols. So you'd rather have someone who was in the league. It would have been easier if the G League was still playing. They would have been testing. You can cherry pick. They have to do something, but this Precious thing is a problem.
Yeah.
It wasn't a problem the first half of the season. I don't know when it happened, and maybe it's just the stakes happening. And the other thing I want to add on this, because I don't think I've ever seen this, his free throw shooting.
Yeah, it's gone.
He, right at this moment, might be the worst free throw shooter
He was pretty
at the
good.
moment.
He was pretty good at
Yes,
the beginning of the
And
season.
he showed at Memphis that he could hit the short jumper. He never had the three-point range, but now you talk about having the yips. That's kind of obvious.
I think he's hit the mental and physical wall. I mean, again, you're talking about a kid who played 1 year of college, no summer league, no training camp that was a normal training camp, right? Didn't even get to play in the tournament last year.
Right.
So you and I were talking off air. Most likely, if they had a normal G League and a G League team this year, he probably would have been in the G League for 2 weeks to a month.
I think
at
least
this
that long
stage.
to get him the reps like they wanted with KZ Okpala last year. The other thing at center is, and it's hard because we always tread carefully on this. I think the Heat's best option right now at backup center, in theory, but clearly not reality, might be Udonis Haslem.
I know.
He can be a big body. He's strong. You see his workouts. He posts them all the time. He has that.
You don't think he's pushing for that behind the scenes? Because I'm sure he is.
But at least maybe try it and give it a look. Look, he has no lift. He doesn't play above the rim. On offense, he better start hitting those jumpers we've heard now for a decade that he's going to hit. We see him pregame. He shoots the three.
He'll be
enough.
Here's the thing I'll say about him, as opposed to Precious. He will be in the right spot. To me,
Yes, that's a great point.
that is the baseline.
It won't be chicken running around with head cut off.
He
like
will
Precious
be
on
exactly
offense or KZ Okpala.
exactly where he's supposed to be. And you mentioned
set
you
screens.
mentioned KZ, and that's another one that we could talk about. But let me throw this possibility: do you just look for a big wing? So in other words, a Rondé Hollis Jefferson, perhaps, or maybe
that.
you hope that Otto Porter gets bought out,
Yeah,
although it
but
doesn't
I
look like that's
have
happening.
Ariza.
Right.
I have Iguodala. I'm talking about you're playing Joel Embiid, and Bam is battling like crazy, gets in foul trouble. The other team then throws in Dwight Howard, and you have no big body against him. I think Udonis can handle that, at least muscle him off the boards. Ethan, how many games have the Heat lost this year on offensive rebounds?
Oh, they have a bunch. Well, I mean, I can point to the Boston game off the top of my head where
And it's
where
Cantor
here,
with the
Cantor,
Trailblazers, yeah.
right? So I mean, there've been at least 3 or 4, and then there's other games that they kind of get away during third quarters when the offensive rebounding starts to happen, and you're relying on guys. Look, first thing, Oladipo's a plus rebounder for guard. Jimmy,
and he got plenty of that.
And
yes.
Jimmy is a plus rebounder
Tyler
for sure.
Hero gets
Tyler
a
is
lot
a
of
plus
rebounds.
rebounder. So in some ways, there is a little bit of an inversion, like there was with the big 3 teams.
I understand
where the
that.
Heat's best
But there's
rebounders were a lot of
also
times
the
their wings.
Big man. There's also
Right.
Enes Kanter at the end of that game last week against the Trailblazers. There's still the games when you simply have to be able to put a big body on. There aren't a lot of teams that have 2 bigs. The Heat got lucky against the Knicks with Mitchell Robinson out,
Right.
so it was just Nerlens Noel. He got in foul trouble. They were very lucky last night with how they misplayed Miles Turner
Yes.
foul situation.
They also misplayed the fouling at the end of the game. I don't know what they were doing. They let
were just-
the
were
clock.
spectating. They were
yeah,
looked like the Heat to a degree in
well,
some of those games.
the Heat have done some of that. But here's the way that you could look at it, because no matter who you bring in, we really are talking in the playoffs about 6 to 10 minutes behind Bam. That's about it. He's going to play him.
Survivable. I would say at least 8 minutes. I would
Okay.
40 minutes is a large number.
But can you get by with Bielitsa for half of those? So
I
are we
don't know
really
if you
talking
get-
about
I don't
4 to
think you
5
get by
minutes?
with him at all. He's
Okay.
not Kelly Olynyk. He doesn't have that strength. He's never been a center.
Right.
He's been sort of a 3-4 kind of player. He's been Luke Babbitt. Was Luke Babbitt a center? No.
No.
He played power forward. He stretched, and he can have some moments. I need
They could use a Kem Birch right now. Like they could, like somebody like that.
Or
If Orlando
Dwight
was to let him.
Howard type, or a chance when they
Right.
had it. Now that's what the Heat don't want. The Heat don't want one-dimensional, non-switchable bigs.
Right.
But at some moment you need them. So you're right about Cousins. He might have. He can always fill the role of a big guy, but he doesn't only want to do that.
Right.
He doesn't only want to say, okay, we're playing now in the playoffs against the Sixers. We will need your big body, but against the Nets, we know they're mostly going to go with Aldridge and Blake Griffin, and probably even Kevin Durant to a degree in their power
Right.
rotation. We're fine against that. So it all is about which matchup you wind up in the playoffs. If you go against Boston, you don't need a center at all.
No.
My God, they're starting Mo Wagner at
I
center
know,
right now.
I know. Oh well, yeah, that's true. Well, okay. Well, one name you mentioned is Dedmon. Do you have any accounting of where he is in his recovery? Because
Well,
I know
no,
they like
right.
him, and he was with them in the summer
We
league.
know
team,
there's the
13.
injury situation there, and again, you have to come ready,
Right.
Because that's what they're getting you for. But I'm assuming they've done their due diligence. So if he's ready, at least the 10-day tryout or something like that to give him minutes, unless you're going to roll Udonis Haslem out there. Ethan, is he going to play a minute this year? And if you don't play a minute, does it count as being a season in the NBA?
I think they need to give him a look. I love. It's a great story. Obviously, I would love to see it, but it gets back to that point. He will be in the right place. He'll set screens. He'll take some charges. He'll grab a couple of rebounds. I'm good with it. Like they don't really need a hell of a lot else, unless again you're just going to go all in and say we're just going to play small and try to blitz your centers off the floor. The only guy I can see on the roster who could do that, if he can be in the right place, is there a role for KZ as a backup wing who is essentially playing small, tiny ball center?
He's simply not caught up to the speed and the importance of each individual moment. He still runs around using his athleticism more than maybe his basketball NBA sense. He hasn't had the minutes. He didn't have the minutes. You know, he's injured. He had some minutes in the G League. He missed his summer league. He could really use that. I don't think he's in any way at all ready. If you had to ask me, KZ or UD, in moments of truth, I would take my chances with UD if he has anything left. Again, we haven't seen.
We haven't seen. The crazy thing is, if Derek Jones Jr. was here, he probably would be playing some small ball five because Eric used that a little bit
and that's
last
what
year.
they're doing with Ariza, and that's fine, except against the Dwight Howards,
Right.
except against, the Ennis Cantors, except against when other teams go big, the Bismack Biyambos, if they're using Zeller also, the two center players. As a matter of fact, I think the most likely 4 or 5 for the Heat, the way I'm looking at it, is Heat versus Charlotte. So will they need a little more size in that matchup?
And of course, Ball will be back by then, we would assume. So that'll be a much tougher matchup. You do mention it, though. 24 games left. I'm looking at the schedule. There are some tough patches here. There's still some back-to-backs.
West Coast trip coming up.
West Coast trip. I think if everybody's right, something like 15-9 is reasonable. To me, 15-9 would get you
Into the 4-5.
Into the 4-5. Is that the goal now, or are you trying to avoid the 4-5 if Brooklyn's the one?
No, you're trying to get to 4, 5, or 6 because of the play-in.
Play-in, right.
You can't be choosy. This is not the old days of, we'll go to number 7, we're going to be on the road 8. No, then you're in the play-in.
Right.
Then all of a sudden you lose 2 games and you're out.
Right.
And 7 has no tangible advantage over
Right.
8 except you get one more home playoff game in the 7-8 play-in game to see who gets the number 7 seed, or else you're basically in the same spot as number 8. You've got to get at least to number 6. I don't believe in the New York Knicks.
No.
I don't believe in the Atlanta Hawks, although probably more than the Knicks because of their depth of talent. So I think that he could wind up being in a fight right there with Charlotte and with Atlanta and themselves to get to the 4-5. The 4-5 gives you a chance to advance a lot better than playing the Nets or the Bucks or the Sixers in the first round.
Well, the best thing that's happened to the Heat is the bottom falling out with Toronto and Indiana, because I still feel like those teams have more personnel than those other teams, but because of the injuries in Indiana, particularly the TJ Warren injury, to me
And
was
Indiana
huge.
will be a playoff team. Toronto is just toast right now. We almost know the 5 teams that won't be in the play-in, so we know in some form the Heat will be in some form of playoff no matter how it goes, because you know that Cleveland and Orlando and Washington and possibly Chicago right there in Toronto.
Detroit.
And Detroit's the other team instead of Chicago. You sort of know the 5 who are out, so it's a great league. 20 of 30 make the playoffs.
18-5-5 for Oladipo tonight. What do you say?
I don't think he'll play enough for that. I also think he will go out of his way not to try to overscore and force his way in there. But I think it'll be a nice, uplifting night that he'd need. And, hey, the Warriors, even though they're playing in the West position right now, that's a tough team.
Yeah, and first assignment with the Heat. Go guard Steph. All right, follow him at Ira Heatbeat. Follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick. Kai is back in here next. Thanks for joining us on Inside the Paint.
This has been Inside the Paint with Ethan Skolnick and Ira Winderman, exclusively at OnSideRadio.com. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Search for Inside the Paint on most platforms.
Big O for M&S Air Conditioning. You know, air quality in your home and business is more important than ever. That's why you've got to call M&S Air Conditioning and let them install a high-efficiency polarized air filter in your AC unit. Folks, it attracts, captures, and destroys biological contaminants to improve your air quality. With stellar customer service, answering your call from 7:30 a.m. till 9 o'clock p.m. For more info on high-efficiency air filters and their preventative maintenance plans, visit M&S Air Conditioning at ac-florida.com.
Papa, why can't we telegraph while riding a horse?
Son, there ain't no one to blame but Jeffro. He was riding old Betsy the Stallion, tip-tapping away at his telegraph, when blam! Ran right into the side of the saloon.
Well, if Jeffro can't do it, neither should you. Don't text and drive.
Visit StopTextStopWrecks.org. A message brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration